Before using the fire behavior model, Jim Steele has taught himself to validate it. He uses visualization as a tool to figure out how existing fuel density will help him determine the heat-sinking properties of a fire. Jim Steele grew up in New Hampshire, where he studied forestry at the University of New Hampshire for 2 years, graduating with an associate's degree. He came west in 1968 when he went to Missoula and graduated with a bachelor's degree and entered the Forest Service. After 6 years with the agency, he moved to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where he became a professional forester. He remained with the Bureau for 24 years and retained qualifications in several fire positions. Jim describes the importance of finding the heat sinks within a fire and how that has helped him visualize fire behavior.
I spent a lot of time observing fire, and one of the concepts that is mentioned, and it's actually mentioned as part of the behave model, which is heat sinking, is never really discussed on how it affects fire behavior. Well, the Gilbert Creek fire was high elevation, subalpine fir lodge pole, it's old growth, so there's a lot of dead and down, large wood and rotten, as well as we call them live culls. In other words, they're trees that they're cull only because they don't produce merchantable wood, but they're still living tissue. But they also carry a lot of rot inside them, and so fire builds up in smolders, and you have these day-night inversions that settle in, and as soon as you get an inversion, it's a cap, and it just holds in all the heat and the smoke, and this fire wasn't burning out of a shelter in a thermal belt necessarily, but you could see that as it smoldered and burned around surface fuel, and it wasn't very big, not a very intense fire, but it generated enough heat. But the understory was a mix of about 4 different kinds of shrubs, the largest one being Menziesea and alder, those two, and then there were a couple of more low to the ground shrubs. But these things were absorbing heat. They were still green. They were absorbing the heat that was being put off by all this smoldering fuel, large stuff, small stuff. And then what it took was just a breeze. And they had heated up to the point where all it needed was an ignition at the surface to kick things off, and then pretty soon the surface fire, which was probably burning at less than, or maybe six inches to a foot, transitioned right into these shrubs, and the next thing you know, you had a running surface fire through green shrubbery that then would transition up into the crowns of the subalpine fir. And what it's doing is that green material is dark, so it's absorbing heat, raising the surface temperatures of the fuel. This is live fuel. These were fuels that had very close to, if not more than 100% fuel moisture in them. They're live fuel. So it's raising this temperature to the point where it's very easy, what with the chemicals in the plant tissue and everything combined, boom, it burns. It is modeled, it's part of behave, but it's part of the fire spread mechanism. It has nothing to do with heat buildup over time. All this was going on, the fire was 150 acres, and it's going on within that 150-acre perimeter. The model predicts or projects from point source, which we use at the perimeter of the fire. It has nothing to do with interior burning. And that's what I'm talking about, because that's where the problem occurred. It's the interior burning that you can't get to because of the perimeter fire. And it's all this unburned material that's burning up inside and throwing heat and spot fires out, and continually pushing forward, creating new movement in the fire. Smoke tells me where the heat is. I have to look at the vegetation to determine in my mind whether or not there is a large heat sink, and what kind of heat sink. Shrubs become a heat sink that is more reactive to the environment than a 38-inch log laying on the ground. They're both heat sinks. So is a rock. A rock is a heat sink. So we're talking about vegetation, burnable, combustible vegetation, and we're talking about its structure, how it's laid out, as it fits the 7 properties of fuels that contribute to fire behavior, only it's live. And then the heat sinking properties it's an aspect of what goes on. It's the physics of fire. It's part of the cycle. And although the behave model incorporates it in there, it only incorporates it in as the part of the preheating phase to ignition to project rate of spread or fire line intensity. Everything in fire is space and time. And here I'm looking at space. I want to know how much space is occupied by what potentially could be a large heat sinking property that would contribute to rapid fire spread. Right. And I'll ask specifically by species what's here. Is this here? Do you have a large component of this? Yada, yada, yada. If it's a place I'm not used to, I'll ask what kind of shrubs do you have, or what's the understory comprised of? Most people are going to focus on surface litter because that's what we teach them, and that's what fits into the model. You know, some of the behave models incorporate deciduous in there, but they don't talk about it in terms of, I don't want to say heat sinking because it does, but what I want to know, I want to get a visual in my mind of what it's going to look like. How dense is it? How tall is it? I mean, is it something you have to do this to get through, or is it something you can just kind of John Wayne your shoulders through and do fine? Is it very sporadic and open? And then in conjunction with that, I have to look at what the litter fuels and the dead and down are to get an idea of what kind of smoldering activity is going to happen. It's not the rapid running fire that concerns me. It's that residual long-term smoldering, heat-producing day after day after day kind of stuff. I have to validate the model, and I like a description that I can visualize, and in my mind I can burn fire through it, and then based on that I have to validate what I thought. Otherwise, what I originally think really pollutes my perspective from then on. If I can feel comfortable in this visualization, and I can feel comfortable in the descriptions that I get of how the fire was burning and spreading and how quickly it spread, and use actual measurements, they will draw it on the map, and the origin is here and it's up here right now, and it took 4 hours to get there. Then to me it's pretty much digital caliper or straight mathematics to say that tomorrow, in which we live, is 66 2/3% probability it's going to do exactly the same thing tomorrow. And that being the case, to project it up here is not an unreasonable prediction.
One of the precepts of high reliability organizing is that our expectations of what is going to happen are often based on routine procedures that can blind us to the ambiguity lurking in most situations. Some people have defined this blindness as, if I don't see it, it must not be happening. Jim Steele fought his own blindness in fire behavior prediction by seeing more. The skills that helped him do this were strong powers of observation and visualization, seeing what others might not see, and then creating a mental image of how the fire would actually behave in light of what he saw and visualized. Then, by matching what he saw and visualized with the limitations identified in Rothermel's fire spread and intensity model, one of which is the concept of a heat sink, he designed a fire prediction model that more accurately predicted real-time fire behavior. Try seeing the fires you work on in a different way. Question yourself over what you might not be seeing. Try various techniques to change the normal way you observe fire behavior.